talking about like how COVID has impacted, I think, the full pyramid as a whole. And I think you also did a podcast, I think you talked about recently about the project Big Picture. What do you think is wrong or good with that? What is your opinion on it?
Everything's wrong about it.
But I just wanted to ask, like, as a whole, like from the outside, it just looks like they are like the top teams are pumping money for the down pyramids, down lower down the pyramids.
Well, I think it's if you in life or in anything, in a company, in a family, you're always as strong as your weakest link. And I was brought up to believe that the rich have got a responsibility to help the poor, and that's very difficult. That's a very difficult concept to get across in such a capitalist sport as football. But what I object to be perfectly honest, is guys from outside, individuals from outside who've got no idea or conception of what football means to a club or to a community. They see football as a method of making money or making more money. And we're talking about billionaires here. And they've got no feel for what football can and should be, which is this expression of a common cause, its commitment, it's a shared love. They don't love football. I bet a couple of them don't even like it. What they do appreciate is the money that they can make because of the global popularity of the Premier League. And we're getting at the moment, it was very significant that Project Big Picture was essentially created by two sets of American businessmen representing Liverpool and Man United. So you've got the Glazers, who have never risked a penny or a dollar of their own money, but have taken nearly £1 billion out of Manchester United. You have Fenway, or John Henry, in the embodiment of that. That's a company now which is undergoing a merger with an acquisitions company, Red Bull. Now, at the end of that, Fenway will probably be worth $8 billion. They are using the distress of others to exploit them. They are saying, right, okay, we can give you some support, but this is what we want. We need all the power in our hands. And it's not just Liverpool and Manchester United, it's the top six. So, basically they're saying, well, we are more equal than the rest of you. We're going to take all the money. We've got all the influence. They were even saying that the top six could say to, I don't know, a Burnley, let's say, oh, you've got this great, I don't know, you've got an Indian owner, let's say, coming from Bollywood, who's got lots of money, great ambition, great ideas, and we're not going to let him in because we don't want his competition. Now, that's crazy. My view very much is that I think people, I don't know what it's come across like on TV where you are, but it's really weird watching football without fans. And everyone is saying football needs fans. It should cherish fans. Yet these guys are basically trying to milk them dry. We have a situation in England at the moment where from this weekend, Manchester United playing at Newcastle, it costs the average viewer another £15 to get pay-per-view for that. And that's on top of the £100 or so a month they're already paying for it. So at a time when work is scarce, people are worried about their health, about their jobs, these football billionaires are saying, we want more of your money. Give it to us. Now, I hate that, and I don't mind saying that, because football doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the towns and the communities that those clubs represent. It belongs to kids. It belongs to fans of all ages, both sexes. It belongs to you. It belongs to me. It doesn't belong to them. And, you know, they are trying to just essentially exploit a pretty bad situation for their own ends. And I hate it. And my view very much is, and I'd be interested to see what you think about whether this would work, because I think they should call their bluff. I think they should say, okay, you know, they rejected a project Big Picture yesterday, as we speak, and there will be another review. So they'll come back with another form of it to try and still get some more power. I would say, well, look, call their bluff. Say, okay, you top six, go away. Go and form your Super League with Juventus, because obviously you're a fan. You know, the rest of the European elite. You have a Super League, which I think will be really popular initially in Asia and the developing world as well, and North America. But eventually people are going to get bored with that. You know, you can only play, Liverpool can only play Juventus 5 times in 2 months or whatever, and people are going to get bored with it. So we'll go. I think the great strength of football is almost the intimacy that it is. It's your club, it's your town, and I think it'd be quite interesting to see when we get through the pandemic how will football have changed in England. And I think more fans will actually go down to the smaller clubs, because they have a greater affinity with them there. You can't, you know, the ordinary man and woman cannot identify with an owner who's got more billions than he can count. They cannot identify with players on, well, let's take Mesut Ozil, who's actually I like as an individual, because he's got a fantastic social conscience. But he's being paid £350,000 a week to do nothing because he's fallen out with his manager. I find that mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. But I would go back to the central point, really, is that I believe in the rich doing what they can to help the poor, and I think our government should help more. I think our government has got a responsibility that it's shirking to actually support these businesses, because that's what they are. If they don't, I think quite a few clubs will probably go out of business, and that would be terrible. Because in this film that I've just started, I've gone to a club called Bury, which died, you know, was closed last year. They're setting up a new club, and what struck me, you know, I went to the old ground, which was obviously shut up. And about a year ago, there were all these protests. So all the fans got there and they put their shirts on the gates and their flags. So it's a year on now, and the sun's been at them during the summer, and it's getting colder now. And, you know, the whole, it looks really tatty, the place. The thing that struck me very much, and it was in my own mind, was that it's a bit like going to someone's grave and they've not laid flowers on it, and it's untended. It's exactly like that, the football club, and it felt eerie. But it's when you go there and you realize that, okay, it's not just, you know, there's only 23 teams in that league. That one missing name and one missing club is a real personal tragedy for thousands of people. You know, there was a guy that I met at Bury who said, you know, I cry every time I go there because I know what it means. It means that, you know, we buried the ashes of my friend next to the pitch. This is where I've been when I found my dad 50 years ago. It means something. You know, it's not just a football club. You know, Barcelona do that, don't they? Barcelona say, game more than a club, which is probably in their case a bit of a branding exercise. But when you go to those smaller clubs, you realise that is true. It is more than a club. It's about people, and it's about the relationships they form and the passions that they have. And I love that. That to me is football. Liverpool playing Juventus 5 times in 2 months is not football.
The VAR Show. The one place for your weekly football update.
So, hello, a very warm welcome to the VAR show, the show which talks about all the various major football leagues in detail. Today, we are going to connect with interviews, and we have one of the most famous authors with regards to football books in general. We have Mr. Michael Calvin with us. So, without wasting much time, I would like to first thank Michael for coming on the show. Thank you and welcome to the show. And I would like to begin by asking you, how are you and what are you doing these days?
I'm going quite well, thank you. All things considered, Subhashish. I'm just about to start a new documentary, and I'm about 3/4 away through my next book. So we never stop, we never close.
I wanted to ask you, how did it all begin?
Well, as a small boy, I had a love for football, almost I had a degree of imagination which was almost forced upon me. As a boy of 16, I got tuberculosis and had to go into hospital for 3 months, and obviously was divorced from real life, and I almost created my own fantasy world around football. And so when I got out, I'd already actually badgering my local newspaper. I want to come, I want to write, and they gave me a job when I was 17, and I've been really lucky since then. I went through into Fleet Street very quickly. It became a chief sportswriter of 2 or 3 of our national newspapers here in England. So that meant really that I covered all the major events in all sports, but obviously football being the world's greatest sport, or certainly the world's most popular sport. It meant that I spent a lot of time at matches, probably doing about 100 games a season. And I've been really, really lucky. The game and sport in general has probably taken me to about 80 countries, something like that. And from a guy from pretty humble roots in England, it's been a blessing, really.
Of course, like you said, you started with newspapers and writing columns. How did you jump to what made you take the risk, or you take the plunge into writing book?
Well, the thing about being a chief sports writer is, so as I said, you do all the big events, and on a daily basis, I could write maybe my major column would be anywhere between 800 and 1200 words. And I found that was fine up to a point. I kept getting into a situation where I wanted to explore things a bit more deeply. Now, current trends in football writing and sports writing in general are of what they call the long read, which is 4,000 or 5,000 words, which has been a pretty recent phenomenon. I wanted really to, as I say, get underneath the skin of a subject. I had written a book when I was only 20. It was a cricket book with the then England cricket captain, a guy called Ray Illingworth. And I enjoyed that, but that was only a relatively small book, sort of 35,000 words. When you do a book, it's 100,000 words. And then that gives you the scope to really get under the skin of the subject, as I said. I competed in a round the world yacht race, and did a book off the back of that, which was again mainly picture driven, but I suppose it was about 40,000 words. I'd always wanted to do what I see in my own mind as a proper book, and you'll know yourself in the media that you develop networks of either contacts or acquaintances or friends. And some of those contacts become very close friends. And I had one who became a football manager. We grew up together, a guy called Kenny Jackett, who is currently manager of Portsmouth in League One in England. A very successful manager at that level. He was managing Millwall, and Millwall is a pretty distinctive club with a great heritage and tradition, and some colour attached to it. Let's put it like that. Now, I contacted him and said, look, as a friend initially, I really want to do a book about being right undercover at a football club, embedded into a football club. And I said, look, can I come and spend a year with you? But, no holds barred. So I can go anywhere I want, do anything I want to do, which is obviously, quite a big request. And, but he thought about it for a while and said, look, I think it would be good for the club as well. So I'll speak to the owner and I'll speak to the chief executive. Anyway, they let me do it. And so I spent a season embedded at Millwall, and I was in the dressing room all the time, on the bench for matches, in all the coaching meetings, board meetings, everything. So I got a real, flavour for what a football club is. And they were very natural in my presence. And it was a strange thing, actually, because after a while you become subsumed into the group, you're assimilated into the group. So when there was always this thing at sort of 10-2, 5-3, just before they went out for the game, the team would get into the middle of the dressing room and huddle, and because I was in there all the time, they would pull me in, and they had little superstitions. The goalkeeper, an Irish guy called David Ford, used to say, what are you going to say to me? I said, well, have a good one. And that goes right back to the first game that I was in there, and he was circulating in the dressing room where everyone's hugging and stuff, and he put out his hand to me. We shook hands, and I said, have a good one. In other words, good luck. And he took it from there, really. And he was fantastic, because I would the first team, the first 11 would go out into the tunnel, and the tunnel at Millwall then is very narrow. And so you'd have the first 11, and then I would be number 12, and the substitutes would be behind me, because Fordy would be at the back of the team. And when the other team would come out, he had this really big, deep voice, and he would say, "We've got you," and all this sort of stuff, and you could see the fear and the sort of trepidation in the eyes of some of the opposing players, because the Den is a really difficult place to play, because the tunnel is very narrow, and you can look out and into the light, if you like, and all you can hear is this sound. It's like, it's a bit like, I don't know if you know Lord of the Rings, the orcs. The orcs were waiting for them. So it was fantastic. But also, with all that theatre, you understood the reality of a footballer's life. Those guys, they have mortgages to pay. They have insecurities to deal with. And the one thing I took from that was to be a professional footballer in particular, but also a professional athlete in general, you have to have a very, very strong character, and you have to deal with the insecurity which is there with everyone. And I take that, I can remember, the insecurity comes out in different ways. It comes out in perfectionism. So if you look at someone like Cristiano Ronaldo, another friend of mine, Paul Clement, was assistant at Real Madrid when Cristiano was there, and that's the drive. When they were winning European Cups, there was one European Cup final which they won in, remember it, and he Paul was in the dressing room afterwards, and he expected the whole thing to be absolutely exultant, everyone running around and shouting and screaming. There was a degree of that, but in the corner he noticed there Cristiano Ronaldo, Ramos, one or two other the key players in the team were talking about next year, next season. We've got to do this again. We've got to do this again. And, you know, that sort of perfectionism, I think is the root of you know, true greatness in sport, but also it underpins everything in life, I think, Subhasish, because if you think about it, no one does anything special without being completely committed to what they do. And so that's what, you know, in a very sort of roundabout way, that probably justified why I wanted to get involved in sport in the first place as a writer, because, excuse me, when you write about sport at the highest level, you see the best in human nature. And so that's a really, you know, fascinating element to it. But as I say, I've been really lucky, and I've sort of met and worked with, you know, the greats really, and that's been, you know, the great privilege of my life, I suppose.
Of course, like you mentioned, like how Ronaldo and few players always, like, you know, they don't rest on their laurels and always think of the next one. So when you are writing a book, when you complete, do you already think of the next book or something?
Yeah, you do. It's funny. The great thing about doing a book, and as I say, I've pretty much moved out of newspapers now because, you know, the industry trends are changing. I'm doing quite a few podcasts and TV documentaries as well. But the books, I love books because you become immersed in them. You know, you're thinking about them all the time. You wake up at night and you think, oh, right, you know, I could do that, or I could do this, or that's quite a good line. And what tends to happen is that one book comes out of the previous one in some type. So for instance, you know, I did the Millwall book, which was called Family. And during that, I was in the manager's office with the chief scout, a guy called Jamie Johnson. And we're chatting away, and he said, you know, well, you should do a book on us, the scouts. No one's ever done one. I thought, actually, that's a really good idea. So I did, and it's funny enough, Jamie's father, Mel, is also a long-term scout. He's currently chief scout at Queen's Park Rangers in the Championship in England. And he said, yeah, well, I'll teach you. You know, I'll take you around and I'll introduce you to the guys. So basically, I operated as a scout for about a year. And that was fascinating. Well, there you go. And it was a great experience, that, because you know, Mel was brilliant, and it was a completely different world. It was a world there that there were dreamers there, which I love dreamers, because I think that's the essence of life, isn't it? You know, dreaming that you can do better. And he introduced me to, you know, to what I call the mileage men, the guys who only get 40p, which is, you know, very, very little per mile for their car. They don't get paid. And these guys find players who are worth millions of pounds, and yet they never get any financial benefit from it. So that book made quite a bit of an impact. And ironically, my son is now a scout, professional scout. He was a you know, good schoolboy player, but took his coaching badges early, got a degree in sports coaching science, and then so basically there's a new breed of scout around at the moment. There's what I call it's the combination of what I call the eye chart and the pie chart. The eye chart is the guy who goes to a game and sees a player. I'm sure you might have done the same thing, and you think, actually, yeah, I can see that. That's a good player. Now, what the modern scout does, like my son Aaron, there's a group of young guys beginning to emerge where they have that intuitive skill. They can, you know, some of these old boys you see on the circuit, you know, they feel a player. They can just feel him. You know, in the book, you know, there was a you know, one scout who talked about seeing a player. It was actually Stan Collymore in England International, and he was in non-league football at that time, and he said, look, I knew he was a player just by the way he walked out onto the pitch. Now that's crazy, but then you've also got this analytical side as well. So that whole game is changing. But it was I suppose it's a bit like sort of like parachuting into the Amazon excuse me, the Amazon jungle, and you find an unexplained tribe, and you live with those tribe, and you introduce them to people. So I suppose I did that, and then I did the managers, because I did a book called Living on the Volcano, where excuse me, I wanted to again show the reality of their lives. Did that with the footballers, hopefully did that with the scouts, because we all see them on TV, don't we? We all see the Premier League managers and the Serie A or wherever, and they have this great aura of competence and competitiveness, yet actually, again, a bit like the players they control, they do have their own insecurities. It's a mad profession, management. You're a fashion item, and you need to be a politician, you need to be a psychologist, you need to have the skin of a rhinoceros. But the best ones, even the best ones, have their doubts, their self-doubts. And what I found really interesting doing that book was you can see the mental health issues that come about because of the profession, the nature of it, the pressure that they're under. Now, a little tip for anyone who's an aspiring writer who wants to listen to this, but the key element of any book is the first sentence or the first paragraph. You have to grab people with that and then never let go. And in that particular book, there's a guy called Martin Ling, who was a manager. He's now the director of football at Leyton Orient in England. And that book begins with him having electrodes put on his head for ECT treatment because he was suicidal. Thought about driving, walking out into motorways, that sort of stuff. And that was a really, one, it needed great courage for him to say that and admit to it. But secondly, it was interesting that every manager that I've spoken to since, thankfully they've all read it. But they all say, yeah, I saw a little bit of myself in him or a little bit of myself in that particular person. So I suppose, to look at it, in a broad sense, what I like to do is be authentic and just show the reader what is going on underneath the surface, I suppose.
So definitely, personally, even I have felt like you have a lot of authors, whom I admire. Like you have Jonathan Wilson, Michael Cox, who write maybe more of the statistics part of the, books. Like you have the mixer or inverted, but your books are it's easy to read and you get interested because it's something which was probably not explored. I think your books are kind of like the Amazon all in or nothing, but in the form of books, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I suppose, to go back to what I said, the thing about sport is that you've got the best in human nature and the worst. So I like my books to be about the humanity of sport. And, that is, a little bit about what I've been talking about, where, you cut a superstar footballer and he still bleeds like you and me. You shout at a manager and he'll still wince like you and I would. They're human beings, they're flesh and blood. And that gets lost, I think, in modern sport, but specifically modern football. As you know, it's a huge global industry now. And the cameras are always there, they're omnipresent. The players are huge public figures. And I've always been fascinated by how individuals deal with that attention as people. So, I've been lucky. I've done some. I also do sort of co-write some books. So I did recently the England rugby captain Dylan Hartley, who talked about his concussion and his fears of not being able to grow up with his young daughter and his young son. I did Alistair Cook, who was quite interesting, the cricketer, because Alistair I've known quite well, and he only lives about 5 minutes from me. He's got a farm down the road, and because when we were talking about doing a book, he said, "Well, I'm not that special." I said, "Well, you can't. Look how many runs you've scored. You've got to be special. What is it about you?" So you go back into his past, and actually, I think the key to Alistair was when he was 8 years old. He left home to go into a choir school, and he remembered the first night that his mum and dad left him, and he was all on his own, and all he had at this school was a teddy bear and what he called his QB, which is like a sort of like a plastic ball type of thing, but with different shapes. And he used to throw that against the wall. It came off at different angles, and he caught it. And then so from the first night, he then went into a performing. He had to go and sing in the choir at Westminster Abbey. He had recording contracts. So he was under competitive pressure as an 8-year-old. And that, I think, made him into the sportsman that he became. And also, I'm really fascinated. The book I'm writing at the moment is a bit of a memoir of the people I've seen, but what I've learned about sport and life through sport, really. And so you meet people like, my great hero is Nelson Mandela, and because I'd reported from apartheid South Africa, I had people trying to get me sacked for that and everything else, but I had such huge respect for him as a man, and to see the man and meet the man rather than the legend is a fantastic privilege. Someone like Maradona, you look at Maradona, and I was very fortunate that I was at the Hand of God game. I was reporting on that game, and I've seen him subsequently in all his guises. Again, that guy fascinates me. What makes him tick? Equally, if there's one book I would love to have done, or one interview that I would have loved to have done, I think Tendulkar would be the one, because I just find the attention paid to him by such a huge and enthusiastic country was the magnitude of that I can't get my head around. And it's one of the, so I've covered every major sports event, but the one thing I've never done is a tour of the subcontinent, cricket tour, which I would love to have done, because what I like about the Indian subcontinent and their approach to sport, it's all or nothing, isn't it? I've seen films of the great nurseries of cricket in Mumbai and places like that. I just love to go and live that for a while. But the way that someone like Tendulkar lives his life, how does he do it? And how does he still do it, even though he doesn't play? It's fascinating to see how those guys respond to things,
Of course, I wanted to ask, you said, do you think books, as a genre itself, the text, the hard books like these are going out of fashion, and people who read are probably, people that then do you think there are not many people who read books these days, and they are shifting to maybe even something like audio books or something, or even podcasts?
Yeah, I think there is, obviously more people are consuming, horrible word, but they're consuming books through audio books. But it's interesting, there was a stage about 3-4 years ago when the industry or publishing, more and more people read the books, with their Kindle and, ebooks. But in the last sort of year, the hardback book has made a comeback. And I think it's because it's a bit like, I don't know what you were like with growing up, but, you know, I used to collect vinyl records when I was a kid and even growing up. And then obviously the vinyl records went out of fashion, and you had, you know, and now we've got the EP3s and everything else. Well, going back to those vinyls now. And I think the thing about a book, and it's funny enough, it's something when I do a co-write with people, I've done 4 at the moment. Did Dylan Hartley, Alistair Cook, Joey Barton, and a guy called Gareth Thomas, who was the rugby player who came out as gay. Fantastic bloke. And before I do any of it like that, I always ask him a simple question: why do you want to do this? And, you know, if they say, oh, I want to do it for the money, or, you know, something daft like that, I just say, well, I'm not really interested. I want you need to actually give of yourself in that sense. So I think when people give of themselves, you know, the one thing I always used to say to them is, if you do that, remember one thing: this book, once you put story of someone's life or someone's team or someone's career in between those 2 hard covers, they become immortal. There's an immortality about it, but that will be there, you know. So I said to Cookie, look, when he was saying, well, I'm not sure about this, I said, well, look, if we do this properly, this book will define you both as a man and also as a sportsman, not just to your children, but to their children and their children. So it will be, you know, in 100 years' time, they will, you know, when he's long gone and I'm long gone and you're long gone, there will still be that book there, which is a record of, you know, the magic of books lies that it has this, it freezes time. So if I go back to the Millwall idea, it was 10 years since I did that, did family. And about 6 weeks ago, we did sort of a anniversary podcast. And 5 of the 6 of the players and I, you know, we just sort of just chatting away, really, reminiscing about it. And what struck me, and actually struck them as well, they will always be, that team will always be remembered. I sort of, it was a very, very strong dressing room, and the senior players set the standards both personally and professionally. And if you know, if forget the manager, if you didn't do what they wanted or reach the standards that they needed, you were in trouble. You know, they looked after themselves, and you know, so I call them the governors. And it was interesting, they were all saying, yeah, he said, people, they're still, now it's 10 years on, they always call us the governors. And it struck me then that team will always be that age. So if, you know, the 24-year-old right back will still be 24 in 20 years time, because people will still see him as the 24-year-old. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but it's like time stands still because it's in the book, and that team will always be remembered as that team at that time. And it doesn't matter whether they're getting old and they've got arthritis or whatever, you know, they're getting fat or whatever it is, there will still be those young players in that team. I just think there's a bit of magic about that.
Of course, like you mentioned about Mel, like how he's at QPR right now. I think in this book he's at Liverpool. Yes,
he was. Yeah.
So for me, whenever I hear his name, he'll always be someone who was with Liverpool.
Yeah. He's a good. I'm so glad he's still with us, because he had COVID, and we were worried about it for some time, but he's pulled around, thankfully. But yeah, he's a great guy, and also, you know, you see a lot of, it's always the people around football, you know, some of the agents and who, you know, you think, oh, do I really need to speak to this person? You know, it's guys like Mel who are, you know, they do have a love of the game, and they also have a, I suppose, a selflessness about them, where it's not just about them. It's not a me thing, which a lot of professional sport is. You know, they care about one another. Those scouts. You know, they will scratch each other's eyes out for a player, but and they will probably tell a white lie here and there. But when push comes to shove, and it is at the moment, because a lot of scouts are getting let go because of the financial restrictions due to the pandemic, they all look after one another, and I find that quite attractive, really.
Of course, and you're talking about how COVID has impacted, I think, the full pyramid as a whole. And I think you also did a podcast, I think you talked sport recently about the project Big Picture. What do you think is wrong or good with that? What is your opinion on it?
Everything's wrong about it.
But I just wanted to ask, as a whole, from the outside, it just looks like they're like the top teams are pumping money for the down pyramids, down lower down the pyramids.
Well, I think it's, if in life or in anything, in a company, in a family, you're always as strong as your weakest link. And I was brought up to believe that the rich have got a responsibility to help the poor, and that's very difficult. That's a very difficult concept to get across in such a capitalist sport as football. But what I object to be perfectly honest, is guys from outside, individuals from outside who've got no idea or conception of what football means to a club or to a community. They see football as a method of making money or making more money. And we're talking about billionaires here. And they've got no feel for what football can and should be, which is this expression of a common cause, it's commitment, it's a shared love. They don't love football. I bet a couple of them don't even like it. What they do appreciate is the money that they can make because of the global popularity of the Premier League. And we're getting at the moment, it was very significant that Project Big Picture was essentially created by two sets of American businessmen representing Liverpool and Man United. So you've got the Glazers, who have never risked a penny or a dollar of their own money, but have taken nearly £1 billion out of Manchester United. You have Fenway, or John Henry, in the embodiment of that. That's a company now which is undergoing a merger with an acquisitions company, Red Bull. Now, at the end of that, Fenway will probably be worth $8 billion. They are using the distress of others to exploit them. They are saying, right, okay, we can give you some support, but this is what we want. We need all the power in our hands. And it's not just Liverpool and Manchester United, it's the top six. So, basically they're saying, well, we are more equal than the rest of you. We're going to take all the money. We've got all the influence. They were even saying that the top six could say to, I don't know, a Burnley, let's say, oh, you've got this great, I don't know, you've got an Indian owner, let's say, coming from Bollywood, who's got lots of money, great ambition, great ideas, and we're not going to let him in because we don't want his competition. Now, that's crazy. My view very much is that I think people, I don't know what it's come across like on TV where you are, but it's really weird watching football without fans. And everyone is saying football needs fans. It should cherish fans. Yet these guys are basically trying to milk them dry. We have a situation in England at the moment where from this weekend, Manchester United playing at Newcastle, it costs the average viewer another £15 to get pay-per-view for that. And that's on top of the £100 or so a month they're already paying for it. So at a time when work is scarce, people are worried about their health, about their jobs, these football billionaires are saying, we want more of your money. Give it to us. Now, I hate that, and I don't mind saying that, because football doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the towns and the communities that those clubs represent. It belongs to kids. It belongs to fans of all ages, both sexes. It belongs to you. It belongs to me. It doesn't belong to them. And, they are trying to just essentially exploit a pretty bad situation for their own ends. And I hate it. And my view very much is, and I'd be interested to see what you think about whether this would work, because I think they should call their bluff. I think they should say, okay, they rejected a project Big Picture yesterday, as we speak, and there will be another review. So they'll come back with another form of it to try and still get some more power. I would say, well, look, call their bluff. Say, okay, you top six, go away. Go and form your Super League with Juventus, because obviously you're a fan. The rest of the European elite. You have a Super League, which I think will be really popular initially in Asia and the developing world as well, and North America. But eventually people are going to get bored with that. You can only play, Liverpool can only play Juventus 5 times in 2 months or whatever, and people are going to get bored with it. So we'll go. I think the great strength of football is almost the intimacy that it is. It's your club, it's your town, and I think be quite interesting to see when we get through the pandemic. How will football have changed in England? And I think more fans will actually go down to the smaller clubs, because they have a greater affinity with them there. You can't, the ordinary man and woman cannot identify with an owner who's got more billions than he can count. They cannot identify with players on, well, let's take Mesut Ozil, who's actually I like as an individual, because you've got a fantastic social conscience. But he's being paid £350,000 a week to do nothing because he's fallen out with his manager. I find that mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. But I would go back to the central point, really, is that I believe in the rich doing what they can to help the poor, and I think our government should help more. I think our government has got a responsibility that it's shirking to actually support these businesses, because that's what they are. If they don't, I think quite a few clubs will probably go out of business, and that would be terrible, because in this film that I've just started, I've gone to a club called Bury, which died, was closed last year. They're setting up a new club, and what struck me, I went to the old ground, which was obviously shut up. And about a year ago, there were all these protests. So all the fans got there and they put their shirts on the gates and their flags. So it's a year on now, and the sun's been at them during the summer, and it's getting colder now. And, the whole, it looks really tatty, the place. The thing that struck me very much, and it was in my own mind, was that it's a bit like going to someone's grave and they've not laid flowers on it, and it's untended. It's exactly like that, the football club, and it felt eerie. But it's when you go there and you realise that, okay, it's not just, there's only 23 teams in that league. That one missing name and one missing club is a real personal tragedy for thousands of people. You know, there's a guy that I met at Bury who said, you know, I cry every time I go there because I know what it means. It means that, you know, we buried the ashes of my friend next to the pitch. This is where I've been when I found my dad 50 years ago. It means something, you know, it's not just a football club. You know, Barcelona do that, don't they? Barcelona say more than a club, which is probably in their case a bit of a branding exercise. But when you go to those smaller clubs, you realize that that is true. It is more than a club. It's about people, and it's about the relationships they form and the passions that they have. And I love that. That to me is football. Liverpool playing Juventus 5 times in 2 months is not football.
Of course, and you know, like I had 2 questions, you know, like follow-up questions. That first one is like you said, like how maybe the big 6 are kind of taking advantage of maybe of the sad situation of the other teams below in the pyramid. But isn't that the inefficiency of someone, you know, somebody that is letting them take the advantage? And also the second one was, like you said, like how in the big picture, like how you had like the top tier, you know, like traditional top 6 teams, you know, like who could, you know, veto a move of a takeover. Did not that happen with Newcastle earlier this year?
Well, they the thing is, when I did another film of one of my books, and I interviewed a supporter, and he said, what you've got to understand is that the ordinary supporter doesn't care who takes over his club. He said it could be some sort of, you know, mass cocaine dealer from Colombia. If he's got money and he gets the best players, they love him. So we start from that point. But I looked at the morality of that takeover at Newcastle, and to be honest, I was pretty glad that it didn't take place. I understood from a sporting point of view why the fans were so enthusiastic, because there's a great football club in a great city, a great football city, which has been betrayed by its current owner, Mike Ashley, you know, who again, in a smaller scale, is just using football for his own ends, financially. Now, okay, you can say that's the way of the world. I think, you know, for your first point there, Subhashish, because that was where you probably hit on something. Football is really badly regulated. You know, these guys they do these things because they think they can get away with it, and they usually can get away with it. I've thought for a long time that what football in England needs is an independent regulator. So a guy because everything in football is governed by self-interest from one club or the other, or a collection of clubs against another collection of clubs. So if you look at what happens in North America, you've got Major League Baseball, the NBA, NFL. They all have commissioners who don't have a loyalty, and you know, their role, and they do it sometimes well, sometimes not so well, but their role is to look after the overwhelming well-being of the game. That's what we need in English football. And if we had that, someone with a broad view of what was needed and wasn't beholden to a particular clique or a particular club, we'd get a better structure. Now, the problem with football at the moment, economically, it's mad. It's absolutely mad. You know, we're speaking on the penultimate day of the transfer window, where Premier League clubs can still buy from the EFL clubs. In this transfer window, the Premier League have spent, I think it's something like 1.2 or 1.3 billion pounds on players. So how can an industry like that then go to the government and say, well, you know, look, you know, we've got no money. Can you help us out? Otherwise, our clubs are going to go bust. You can't do that, because it's nonsense. You know, all they say is, well, hang on a second. We've been watching the papers, and we've been, you know, watching the news, and listening to the podcasts. All it's about is which player is going here, and there's £50 million for that player and £70 million for that player. You've got more money. What it is, they're drunk on money. And the money, when it comes in, and it's come in absolute tsunami of money has come in, and they've done nothing with it. What they've done is they've just given it straight to the players, they've given it to themselves, and they've given it to the agents. So, when you've got that economic madness, you need someone to say, hang on, these are the rules. You've got to live within your means. You've got to pay appropriately. You can't spend money that you don't have. And that's what they're doing. Even though they've got millions and millions coming in the door, they're spending money they don't have, which ultimately, when the TV contracts are reduced, the whole thing's going to go bang. I think we're close to the edge, because the other thing that wanted to take control, I would welcome that.
Of course, I wanted to ask you, like you said, we're on the edge, and probably the bubble is about to burst, which has been continuously being said for quite a while. Do you think you'll go back to a time when when maybe 20 million for a player is a lot?
20 million pounds for a player now is something that they just pick out the thin air. It's nothing, is it? We've had actually just about an hour before we started talking, there was a player, a decent player, Caelan Grant, has gone from Huddersfield in the Championship to West Brom, £15 million. He's a decent player, but he's not worth £15 million. And that's on a very small scale. So if you look at, there were some figures banded around, weren't there, when Lionel Messi was going to leave Barcelona and might well have ended up at Manchester City. His earnings, and let's face it, okay, he's worth it in pure terms, because he's still the best player in the world. He was making something like £92 million a year. I just can't get my head around that. City. Dynamic now economically. You've got these American billionaires on one hand, but you've now got these sort of state-sponsored clubs like Manchester City. You've got the oligarchs, so you've got Roman Abramovich at Chelsea. The money that these people are able to invest, well, they don't invest it, they just throw the money at these clubs, is ridiculous. It's huge, and you can't compete with it. You can't, and that's, again, I go back to my Super League point. If you have a competition where, frankly, it's a bit like North America, there's no promotion and relegation in the NFL, NBA, or in baseball. If there's no competition, what's the point? If you can't compete, what's the point? And what I've always thought about English football is that it was still possible to beat the best. Now, it still happens. Well, we saw just before the break, didn't we? Aston Villa against Liverpool and Man United. That probably spooked them. I think the worst thing that happened to English football, it was a fantastic achievement. But when Leicester won the Premier League in 2016, the really big clubs thought, we can't have that. They can't come and steal our crown. And they've then done everything they can to ensure that never happens again, which I find terrible. I loved that story. I thought it was a brilliant underdog story. So if you're in a competition where only 2 or 3 teams at most can win, I know it's the way of the world, but I just don't like it.
Of course, and I want to ask you, during a time when you're involved with sports, especially with football, Which is the best team that you saw playing?
Best team that I saw, blimey. Some of the Barcelona sides, I thought sort of in the 90s, I thought were great. It's a really interesting one, that, because individual aspects, in a weird way, I'll probably get slaughtered in England for this, but I really like the Argentina team that Maradona played in '86, because it was his team, and he was capable of so much. The great teams. I've looked back a bit, and I don't know if you do the same thing, but you look at the old newsreels of, like, the great Real Madrid team in '60, and the great Dutch sides going through. I loved. I love teams which allow players to express themselves. So obviously, Messi has done that at club level. It's interesting that he's not really done it at international level in the way that maybe Maradona did. Again, teams leave an impression on me, but individuals do, but they leave a greater impression on me when I've also met them. It's weird, they say never meet your heroes. Well, Pele was one of my heroes, and I met him a couple of times. There was still that. I would. He has the same thing, where he would go into any environment and dominate it, just by the force of his personality. So yeah, it's interesting. The great. I had an affection for the England team in 1990 at the World Cup, because they came pretty close, and I loved Bobby Robson. I just think he was just a wonderful man, and I think it would have been great had he won a World Cup for England. But there are some wonderful individual talents out there, which I probably prefer to concentrate on the individuals than the teams.
Of course, talking about England, I have a last few questions left, and I think England lost yesterday. I think it was against, I think they lost 2-1. What do you think of this England team? Are they good, or like always are they overhyped by maybe the fans and the reporters?
Yeah, well, the media are always hype. We always overhype our football teams over here. So it's interesting that the one thing that Gareth Southgate has done is make them popular. He did so in the World Cup in Russia by making them accessible to the ordinary fan. So we're in a situation where, because of the sort of things we've discussed earlier, the money and everything else, the celebrity, players are from the. What Gareth did was make them more presentable. I covered a lot of England teams where there was a lot of distrust between players, management, and the media. You go into a couple of places, and it was like camp paranoia. England under Capello, for instance, was not very pleasant to actually cover, because I just thought he was there for the money. Gareth has done well on that sense. I think he's struggling at the moment to know what his best team and best system is. He has some fantastic young players at his disposal now. I saw some of those players. I did another book called Living on the No Hunger in Paradise, about the academy system. We did a film on that, and that film was about the team that became the world under-17 champions. They're coming through now. So he's got a lot of young players who are hugely talented. He's got to find a structure and a system for them. That's where he's struggling. The one thing about the one thing that's always thrown at Gareth Southgate is lovely guy, fantastic man manager, really empathetic, understands the holistic nature of his job. Is he good enough tactically? Can he make the right decisions at the right time which is, you know, pretty much like you ask a player, isn't it? Best players make the best decisions the quickest under the most difficult pressure, most pressing pressure. Can Gareth Southgate manage under pressure in a tournament? He did well in Russia, as I said. If we ever get the Euros next year or whenever it's going to be, it's going to be a crunch time for him, because I think there's a sense at the moment that he doesn't know what his best team is. And there's a sense also because, you know, it was like 7 or 8 months without a game. So I think the fans almost stopped getting used to watching an international team. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you know, they're struggling to get momentum at the moment. You know, we're talking the day after England lost to Denmark at Wembley, you know, 2 people sent off in the end, and it was a dreadful game, and England didn't seem to have a clue about what they were doing. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, we've been talking a lot about the human side of football and footballers. I thought last night, that game and what happened to Harry Maguire was really quite sad, because it showed you a human being really struggling with himself. You know, forget the fact he's a footballer. You know, he's had all this other stuff in his life about the court case and everything else. But when he's come back into a football context, it's almost as if he's forgotten how he used to play. You know, he was just, he reminded me, I wrote a note down last night after about 10 minutes, and it was just, it had a name on it, Phil Jones. And he reminded me of Phil Jones because he was playing in a daze and he was making elementary mistakes. And that's even before he got sent off. So he's got to go back to Manchester United today. He might well have an injury. It looked like he got a hamstring injury, but it, you know, it wasn't a physical thing last night. His brain is shot. And I think that's the thing, that the strength of someone like Gareth Southgate is that, you know, and he came out after the game and really defended him, because he said, you know, you shouldn't, you know, people on social media and other people who should know better, by that I think he was talking about Roy Keane, shouldn't criticize him in the way they're criticizing him, because it's having a big effect on him. Now, when so you've got that side of Gareth, which is great, but what I would say is that you shouldn't have picked him in the first place. It was obvious. That's where there is out on, and he can only prove himself in a big tournament, because, you know, this Nation League thing that we've got at the moment, no one gives a damn about. They don't care about it. You know, it's just, well, we care about the World Cup and we care about European championships. That'll do for me.
You know, generally you are an England supporter, and, you know, like, the one thing that, you know, comes to my mind when I see these games, you know, like, there's a phrase in Inverting the Pyramid, the book. The worst thing that could have happened to England was winning the 1966 World Cup, because it did not let them develop their own style, you know, like.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, it's always, we have that ran down our throat, the boys of 66. You know, the interesting thing is that, and I'm quite disloyal for saying this probably, but, and you know, you are the VAR show, okay? Well, what would have happened if VAR would have been at Wembley in 1966? There was that goal. Was it a goal? You know, putting England 2 up in the final. You know, everyone has had their opinion on it, and I look at it now and I think, actually, if that was VAR, that might not have been given.
Also, I think there was a handballs, I think, like, goal line stopped by Jackie Charlton.
Was he? Yeah. Well, you know, it's and that's the thing. I don't like VAR, if I'm honest. You know, nothing against your show, but it was like, I just, again, it goes back. I don't mind things being wrong now and again. You know, wrong decisions, slightly. You know, for the right. If you make a wrong decision for the right reason, I'll forgive you. And now, you know, when you have to wait for like 2 or 3 minutes, and it's like, oh yeah, it's just that little bit. Well, frankly, let's just get on with a game. It's a game. It's not it's a game that's become an industry. And it's interesting. I did Gareth Southgate for one of my books, and I'll paraphrase this so you don't get censored. But he said, the thing is, Mike, he said, this is a great game, but a terrible industry. And I think you probably got it right.
Of course, and I'll move back to your career as a whole. And if you had to choose one moment from your career as a standout moment, which you'll always cherish, which one would that be?
Meeting Nelson Mandela. I got him to sign his autobiography for me. As I said, I'd worked in South Africa just before his release. I actually covered his release as a news guy. I went to cover a cricket tour, a rebel cricket tour there, and it's probably the only time in my career that I took sides, and I hated it. I just hated it. And when we arrived in Johannesburg, the police let the dogs on the protesters, and when we were at the old airport, there were some marble stairways. They chased them up stairways, and they were trapped, and they let the dogs on, and all this blood was running down the stairs. And I used that as an image of oppression, basically. And they used it on the front page of my paper, which was the Daily Telegraph at the time. And I got, I had people trying to sack me and all sorts of stuff, but my editors supported me. And so, I was aware of the injustice in that country. And it was interesting. The guys that I got to know at that time, moved into the government with Mandela, and one of them, allowed me to go and see him for a little while, not long. And what struck me about him was just his, he had a serenity about him, but he was watching everything. He's obviously a fantastic politician as well. So it was really interesting to see him at close quarters. That was a huge thing for me. I think the other thing was when I was a young reporter, in Park Lane in London, and after he'd done this sort of personal appearance thing, he walked straight out into the traffic. Now I don't know if you know Park Lane in London, but there's like four lanes of traffic, and it's pretty incessant. But he stopped the traffic. So in fact, as I'm sitting here, up there's a photograph of me interviewing him in the middle of the road, and it's funny because again, I was really young, and at that time I was completely in awe of him, absolutely in awe of him. And the one thing that I thought at that time was that someone like that, he would be immortal. Well, his legend is immortal, but as a human being, he was mortal. And at that particular time, it's about 1980, I think, something like that. He was showing the first signs of Parkinson's disease. He was going to go back and fight for the title, I think, for the fourth time. Something like that. There was a slight tremor in his hand, and I just dismissed that. But I always remember that. But what I do remember him was just this life force. We talked about earlier on. This sort of aura around him. It was amazing. And yes, I've never forgotten that either.
Also, and do you have since you've been involved in in various forms of writing for a long time, do you have any piece of advice for young writers or authors who want to be?
Yeah, well, I suppose I'll give you the advice that was given to me. There were two specific bits of advice. The first one is good writing is good speaking. So if you've written something, read it out loud to yourself. And if it sounds right, it is right. So if you think about it, let's say let's say a typical tabloid intro would be, I don't know, let's say Jose Mourinho last night slammed Harry Kane over his romp with England or whatever. That doesn't sound right, because no one slams, do they? No one romps. It's a different type of language, which tabloids have actually invented, but it doesn't sound right. So if you've done a piece of writing, just read it to yourself out loud, and if it jars, if a word jars, it means you've got to change it a bit. The second thing is also, and I do get a lot of younger writers asking me, this one in particular, how do I get better? Well, you only get better by, you have to read and then read and then write. And eventually, if you do those two things, for this book, I've been looking back at stuff that I used to do. I look, very good, were you? And it's because, I'm not saying I'm good now, but what is interesting is that as time goes on, because you're writing more and more and more, you begin to develop your own style. And I think that's the key to it. There are no shortcuts with this. That's what I would say to any young writer. You need to work on your craft. It's like, I go back to Tendulkar. He practiced and practiced and practiced, but he was probably the most naturally gifted player in the world, but he still practiced and practiced and practiced. That's what you've got to do. You've got to care about it. And there are other things. In my newspaper days, brevity is there are so many words in a sentence that shouldn't be there. You've got to be really tight with the way you write. Always look at your sentence, and if they look too long, they are too long. If they sound too long, they are too long. So brevity, and also, so for instance, in writing columns in newspapers, or their equivalent now would be an online blog or something like that. When you write, you can say what you need to say in 600 words. You don't need 1,200 words. That's the key. And I'm speaking to someone whose columns in the sort of broadsheet newspapers used to be around about sort of 1,000, 1,200 words. But to get your points across, you only need that minimum, really, 600. As a final point, what I would say is never afraid to be yourself. Writing is an individual thing, and express yourself. Don't be afraid of your own emotions. And when you're writing, have someone in mind that you're writing for. Now, it could be your mum, it could be your girlfriend, or whatever it is. Have someone that you can almost address when you're writing.
So, on that note, I'll ask you one final question. If you had to, suggest one of your books to our listeners to read, which one would that be?
Wow. Well, if you want to understand the way football works, hopefully any of them could do the job. Family gives you an idea of what it's like to be a footballer. The Nowhere Man gives you an idea of what it's like to be a scout. Living on the Volcano gives you an idea about being a football manager. No Hunger in Paradise probably means a lot to me, probably more than the other ones, because it was a hard book to do and a difficult subject to address, because it was young kids in football having their dreams shattered. And, there were some things in that book which I found really quite disturbing as a parent, So I suppose, obviously I'd love everyone to read every one of them, but maybe that one. No Hunger in Paradise. I suppose if you ever want to know anything more about me and where I've, people I've met, probably the next book, which is not going to be out until next April. I've got 2 titles for it at the moment. One is Soul Food, and the other one is probably going to be the one which is going to be called Whose Game Is It Anyway?
Definitely, and I hopefully will read it as soon as it is out. And on that note, Michael, thank you so much for talking to me, and I wish you all the best for your upcoming book, which will be out next year, and hopefully I can read it. And take care, stay safe, bye.
And you, thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.